You never really think about how fast life can change until it happens to you. At 20, you feel untouchable, like there's endless time ahead and nothing can shake you. But sometimes it takes just one unexpected moment to remind you how unpredictable life really is. That summer, I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just picked up a job at a local gym as a lifeguard and part-time swim instructor. It was a straightforward gig. Watch the swimmers, make sure everyone stayed safe, and occasionally teach kids how to float or tread water. For a college kid trying to save up some cash before classes started again in the fall, it was ideal. The gym wasn't anything special, just your typical suburban fitness center. It had an Olympic-sized pool, a few basketball courts, and rows of standard workout machines. The regulars were predictable too. Middle-aged folks trying to stay active, parents with their kids, and a few teens working on their summer fitness goals. Everything about it felt routine. And then there was Isabel. The first time I noticed her, I was tidying up around the pool after my shift. She was swimming laps, her movements so smooth and graceful that I couldn't help but watch. She wasn't like anyone else at the gym. Isabel was older. Much older, though I didn't know just how much at first. Later I'd learned she was 58, but you'd never guess it by the way she carried herself. She exuded confidence, her presence commanding attention in the most understated way. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and even from across the pool, it was clear she had this magnetic energy about her. It wasn't the kind of beauty you see in magazines or hear guys my age talking about. It was something deeper, mature, self-assured. She seemed completely at ease, almost like the water was her second home. For weeks, I watched her whenever I could, captivated by the way she moved. Her strokes were powerful yet fluid, like she belonged there, cutting through the water effortlessly. I figured someone like her would never even notice me, a 20-year-old lifeguard fresh out of high school, just trying to figure out his life. What could someone like Isabel possibly see in me? But then, one quiet evening, everything changed. It was close to closing time, and only a few swimmers were left in the pool. Isabel was finishing up her laps, the last person in the water. As usual, I couldn't help but watch, trying to keep it subtle. She climbed out of the pool, water streaming off her as she reached for her towel. My gaze lingered a second too long, and before I could look away, she caught me. For a moment I froze, my heart pounding like I'd been caught red-handed. But instead of turning away, she smiled, a warm, knowing smile that made my pulse quicken. Wrapping the towel loosely around her shoulders, she walked over to where I was standing. "Hey," she said, her voice calm and friendly. "You're the new lifeguard, right?" "Yeah," I replied, doing my best to sound casual even though I could feel my nerves kicking in. "That's me." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine in a way that felt different. "I've seen you around. You're pretty good in the water yourself." I blinked, caught off guard that she'd noticed me at all, let alone my swimming. "Oh, thanks," I stammered, feeling a bit of heat creep up my neck. "I try to stay in shape." "You should be proud of it," she said, her smile widening. "You've got great form, strong, confident." Her words hit me like a jolt, and for a moment I wasn't sure how to respond. She was standing closer now, close enough that I could pick up the faint scent of chlorine on her skin mixed with something sweeter, something hard to define. "Thanks," I said finally, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. "You're really good too. I've seen you swim, you're amazing." Isabel raised an eyebrow, amused by my awkwardness. "You've been watching me, huh?" I immediately panicked. "Oh no, I didn't mean it like that. You're really good at swimming. That's all." Her smile shifted into something more playful, her tone taking on a hint of teasing. "Well, I'll take that as a compliment." From that moment, things between us shifted. What started as polite conversation began to feel charged, like there was something unspoken hanging in the air. It was subtle but impossible to ignore, an energy that left me wondering what would happen next. Over the weeks, Isabel became a regular part of my routine. Every time she came to the pool, we'd chat. At first, just about swimming, fitness, or other casual topics. But slowly, our conversations grew deeper. They lasted longer, and I found myself looking forward to them more than I cared to admit. I wasn't just anticipating her visits, I was craving them. One evening, the gym was almost deserted. The pool area was dimly lit, the water casting rippling reflections on the walls, and the air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name. Isabel was finishing her laps, her movements smooth and deliberate, as if the water responded only to her. I stood nearby, towel in hand, waiting for her to finish, though my pulse betrayed how calm I was pretending to be. As she stepped out of the pool, her confidence seemed to radiate, drawing my attention in a way I couldn't explain. She carried herself with an ease that was impossible to ignore, and when her gaze caught mine, I knew she noticed. She approached me slowly, the soft padding of her wet footsteps echoing in the quiet space. "You're still here," she said, her voice carrying a light, teasing tone that made my stomach flip. "Yeah," I managed, clearing my throat. "Just making sure everything's in order." She stepped closer, her eyes studying me with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. "Is that all you're doing?" she asked, her tone playful but with an edge that sent a jolt of nerves through me. For a moment I was frozen. The space between us seemed to disappear, and I could feel the heat of her presence. My throat went dry as her expression softened into something more vulnerable yet undeniably bold. My voice caught, and then before I could think I admitted no. She smiled, her lips curving in a way that made my heart race. "I thought so," she murmured. "Gabriel," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "you've been watching me for weeks." I started to stammer out an apology, but she stopped me with a look, her eyes holding a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Curiosity, maybe even longing. "And I've been watching you too." The words hit me like a wave, but before I could process them, she leaned in. She looked at me in a way that made my pulse quicken, her gaze holding a quiet intensity that I couldn't ignore. The connection between us felt undeniable, as if words weren't necessary. The world around us faded as I kissed her back, my hands tentatively brushing against her sides before finding their place around her waist. Time seemed to stand still, and for a moment it was just the two of us, Isabel and me, wrapped in an unspoken connection that had been building for weeks. When we pulled apart, her gaze locked onto mine, her expression filled with a mixture of hesitation and determination. "I wasn't sure if you'd feel the same," she admitted, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, my words spilling out without a filter. "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for weeks. But I never thought." "You didn't think I noticed?" she asked, smiling softly. "I didn't think someone like you would." I trailed off, feeling ridiculous even as I spoke. Her laugh was warm, her hand lightly resting on my shoulder. "Someone like me. Gabriel, you're more perceptive than you give yourself credit for. And you're braver than you think." The vulnerability in her words caught me off guard, but it also made the moment feel all the more real. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and quiet moments where neither of us needed to say anything at all. It was as if the weeks of tension had finally given way to something we couldn't ignore, and neither of us wanted to. Her presence felt magnetic, her confidence, her warmth, the way she seemed to draw me in effortlessly. I could barely find my voice, but when I did, all I could manage was a hoarse "me too." Every part of me felt drawn to her, pulled by a force I didn't fully understand but couldn't resist. My hands moved instinctively, exploring every curve, every subtle detail of her form, as if I were committing it all to memory. Each moment between us seemed to build on an unspoken connection, a spark that felt impossible to ignore. Isabel leaned closer, her voice soft and filled with warmth, breaking the tension that had been building for weeks. It was a moment that felt inevitable, like a connection we had both been waiting to acknowledge. "Gabriel," she whispered, my name barely audible but carrying an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Her voice carried both vulnerability and quiet strength, grounding me in the moment. Her voice was soft, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. I felt drawn to her presence, as if an invisible force had brought us closer together, leaving no space for doubt. Neither of us said a word, but the moment carried all the weight of what had been building between us. As we moved together, it felt natural, like this wasn't the first time but something we'd always known how to do. The locker room around us was quiet except for the sound of our breathing, mingling with the faint echoes of water lapping at the pool outside. There was an intensity in every touch, every kiss, like the world outside had disappeared, leaving only us. I pressed my forehead to hers, my breath shallow as I struggled to process what was happening. "Isabel," I murmured, my voice barely steady, "I can't believe this." Her lips curved into that teasing smile I'd come to know so well, though this time it carried something deeper. "Believe it," she said, her voice low, confident. Her fingers traced lightly down my chest, sending sparks through me. "I've wanted this too." Her words ignited something inside me, and before I knew it, we were completely in sync, our movements instinctive, natural, as if we'd been waiting for this moment for far too long. I kissed her deeply, her response immediate and filled with the same urgency that coursed through me. She held on to me with a quiet intensity, her presence grounding me even as my emotions surged. It was a moment of pure connection, where words weren't necessary. "God, Isabel," I whispered, my voice shaky, caught somewhere between disbelief and pure, unfiltered emotion. She smiled against my lips, her breath soft and warm. "Gabriel," she said, her tone carrying both a tenderness and an undeniable longing. We stayed close, the quiet of the locker room emphasizing the weight of the moment. Her voice, her warmth, the connection we shared. It felt all-encompassing, like nothing else mattered. I could feel her body respond to every movement, every touch, as if we were perfectly in tune with one another. "Gabriel," she murmured again, her voice trembling, filled with both desire and a kind of vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "I want this, I want you." The way she said it, with so much raw emotion, left no room for hesitation. Her words mirrored everything I felt but couldn't put into words. I pressed my lips to her neck, the faint saltiness of her skin grounding me even as my thoughts felt like they might spiral out of control. In her presence, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the quiet understanding between us, unspoken but deeply felt. The locker room felt like a world apart, silent except for the echoes of our closeness and the faint rippling of water in the distance. Nothing else mattered but this connection, this inexplicable pull that had brought us here. Isabel looked into my eyes, her expression a mixture of intensity and tenderness. "Gabriel," she said softly, her voice catching. "I know," I replied, my voice just as unsteady. "Me too." Every touch, every whispered word felt like it was meant to fill the spaces between us, spaces we hadn't even realized existed until now. The rest of the world faded, leaving only us and the moment we'd created together. In that moment, it felt like time had stopped, like the world outside didn't exist. It was just Isabel and me, connected in a way I couldn't put into words. Our hearts raced in sync, and for once, there was no hesitation, no second-guessing. It was pure, unfiltered emotion, a magnetic pull neither of us could resist. I kissed her again, deeper this time, feeling the warmth of her body pressed against mine. The intensity of it all was overwhelming, an unstoppable force that blurred everything else into the background. Every moment together seemed to deepen the bond between us, as if the tension of the past weeks had finally transformed into something neither of us could ignore. The quiet space around us seemed to amplify the connection we shared, a pull that felt both natural and undeniable, as if we were perfectly in sync in a way that went beyond words. Her fingers gripped my shoulders tightly, her touch leaving a trail of heat in its wake. The connection between us grew stronger with every passing moment, as if we'd both been waiting to find this sense of belonging. We sat quietly, the stillness between us filled with an unspoken understanding. Her presence felt grounding, like a calm after a storm. For a while, neither of us spoke. We stayed close, our breaths slowly evening out, the intensity of the moment giving way to something softer, more intimate. Isabel finally looked up at me, her lips curving into a satisfied, knowing smile. "That was," she began but didn't finish, her words trailing off into silence. Yeah, I replied, still trying to wrap my head around everything that had just unfolded. It really was. She laughed softly, her fingers tracing small, absent-minded patterns on my chest. I didn't expect this, she said, her voice quiet but warm. But I'm glad it happened. I nodded, unable to do anything but agree. Everything between us had changed, and there was no going back now. What came next was a mystery, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the connection we'd discovered and the fire that had brought us here. The next few weeks passed in a haze of stolen moments. Each encounter was more intense, more electric than the last. Whether it was a quiet moment in the locker room after hours or a fleeting meeting somewhere more private, we couldn't seem to stay away from each other. It was exhilarating, like stepping into a secret world that existed only for us. But as much as I tried to focus on the present, a weight began to grow in the back of my mind. It was a quiet whisper, a reminder that this couldn't last forever. The secrecy, the age gap, the differences in where we were in life, it all loomed in the distance, waiting to be acknowledged. One night, after another stolen moment together, we lay side by side on the cool tile floor of the locker room. Our breathing was still uneven, and the quiet hung between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. I turned to look at her, the glow of her flushed cheeks and the softness in her expression making my chest ache. We can't keep doing this forever, can we? I asked, my voice low, unsure if I even wanted an answer. Isabel was silent for a moment, her head resting against my chest as she caught her breath. The rise and fall of her breathing against me was steady, grounding. Finally, she tilted her head to meet my eyes. Her gaze was soft but serious, a flicker of sadness I hadn't seen before shining through. I know, she said quietly, her voice tinged with a kind of understanding that made my heart tighten. But I don't want to think about that right now. I nodded, understanding her reluctance. Neither of us wanted to face the inevitable truth, that whatever this was couldn't last. The reasons were obvious. Our difference in age, the secrecy of it all, and the fact that our lives were on completely different paths. But when we were together, none of that seemed to matter. For now, I was content to live in the moment, to let the fire burn as long as it would. Over the next few weeks, we kept finding ways to be together, sneaking moments when no one else was around. Every encounter felt like it carried more weight, more intensity. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to think about anything else. One night, though, as we lay tangled together after meeting at her place, the quiet between us felt different. I looked over at Isabel, her face still flushed, her breathing shallow but steady. She looked peaceful, but something in her expression made me pause, a flicker of thought she wasn't ready to share. Isabel, I started, but the words caught in my throat. She turned to me, her eyes soft but questioning. What is it? For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The reality we'd been avoiding felt like it was finally catching up with us. The gym was closed for maintenance that day, leaving us without our usual place to meet. When Isabel suggested going back to her house, I hesitated for a moment, not out of doubt, but because the idea of stepping into her world beyond the gym felt different. It was exciting in a way I couldn't quite explain, like crossing into uncharted territory. Her house was tucked away on the edge of town, surrounded by trees and set back from the road. It was cozy yet elegant, the kind of place that felt lived in and welcoming. As soon as I stepped inside, I could sense her presence in every detail. The soft lighting, the faint scent of lavender, the timeless quality of the old wooden furniture. It was a space that felt deeply personal, and I couldn't help but feel honored to be there. Isabel led me into the living room, where a fire crackled gently in the fireplace, casting a warm glow across the room. It was a far cry from the locker rooms or gym corners we'd hidden away in before. Here everything felt slower, quieter, and more deliberate. She motioned for me to sit beside her on the couch, and as I did, the heat from the fire mixed with the undeniable tension between us. This time, though, the tension felt different. Not urgent, but meaningful. Isabel turned to face me, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it, her eyes holding a depth I couldn't quite place. "We never really talk about it, do we?" she asked, her voice low and steady. I knew exactly what she meant. So much of what we shared had been unspoken, caught up in the intensity of the physical connection between us. But now, sitting here in her home, away from the hurried encounters of the gym, her question felt heavier. "No," I admitted quietly. "I guess we've been avoiding it." She nodded, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the couch. "It's not that I regret anything," she said after a moment. "I don't. But this, whatever this is, it's complicated, Gabriel." Her words settled over me like a weight I wasn't ready to carry. My heart tightened, but I nodded. "I know," I said softly. "But it doesn't change how I feel when I'm with you." A small, sad smile curved her lips. "You're young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. And this thing between us, it's incredible. But it's not sustainable. We're at such different places in our lives." I reached for her hand, holding it gently in mine. Her skin was soft, her touch grounding. "I don't care about that," I said firmly, surprising even myself with how certain I sounded. "Age, life stages, none of it matters when I'm with you. I don't know what this is, but I know I don't want it to end." She looked at me, her eyes filled with both warmth and sadness. "But it will, Gabriel. You know that, right? Eventually this will catch up to us. It has to." I swallowed hard, her words hitting me like a quiet storm. She was right, deep down I knew she was. But the thought of losing this, of losing her, was something I couldn't bear to imagine. "Maybe," I said after a long pause. "But for now I don't want to think about that. I just want to be here. With you." Isabel held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she leaned in and kissed me. This time, the kiss was slow and tender, filled with all the intensity we'd always shared, but with something deeper, a quiet understanding that made the moment feel timeless. The firelight danced across the room as we lost ourselves in each other. Every touch was deliberate, every movement unhurried, as if we were savoring every second, knowing it might not last. There was no rush, no frantic urgency like before. Here, in the warmth of her home, everything felt more intimate, more connected. Her every word and glance carried a depth that seemed to bridge the silence between us, creating a connection I couldn't fully comprehend but deeply valued. The quiet between us felt meaningful, every moment stretching into something unforgettable. The quiet crackle of the fire, the softness of the couch, and the feel of her warmth against me. It was all so different from the hurried moments we'd shared before. "Gabriel," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as her hand slid down my back, pulling me closer. "I don't want this to end." I kissed her again, my movements slow and deliberate, as if to tell her without words that I felt the same. We moved together, the heat between us building gradually, every touch, every kiss filled with meaning. It wasn't just passion this time, it was something deeper, something that had been growing between us from the very beginning. The night stretched on, the fire burning low until only glowing embers remained. We lay together on the couch, tangled in each other's arms, the quiet sounds of the night filling the space around us. Isabel rested her head on my chest, her breathing steady as she broke the silence. "I know we can't keep doing this," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "But I don't want to stop." "Neither do I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart ached as I thought about what the future might hold. And in that moment, as we lay there in the dim light of the fire, I knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges or endings awaited us, I would never forget this. The connection, the passion, the way she made me feel alive. It was something I would carry with me forever.